Hello everyone, my name is Akal and I am a somatic therapist. If you'd like to find out a little bit about the work I do, you can check out my link down below this video. Well, rather it's my website. And also down below this video, what you're going to need to understand this content a little bit is you're going to need to know what your nakshatras are. And primarily what we're talking about here is the nakshatra associated with your ascendant or your moon primarily, but also your sun. Those are probably the three most important placements when it comes to talking about nakshatras. So the nakshatra we're going to cover today is the 14th, I believe, which is Chitra. So Chitra Nakshatra, this is really kind of a fun one for me. I've dated a number of women who had this energy very pronounced in their charts. And I will say that, when I was reading the descriptions through my various resources about this particular nakshatra, that is pretty spot on in terms of at least my experiences with the women I dated. So Chitra is really interesting because it's really the only nakshatra I believe that's actually represented by a singular star, and that is Spica. So the singular star is often described in some ways as this glowing white pearl in the sky. Again, this is a very apparent star. It's very bright. And it's right in the Libra, or the Virgo, right at the end of the Virgo constellation. So Chitra is actually a nakshatra that, again, and we're talking about Vedic astrology here. It's the nakshatra that's associated with the end of Virgo. So half of it is in Virgo and half of it is in Libra. So this understanding actually brings out a lot of the qualities that exist in folks who've got this in their chart prominently. So let's start out with the Gunas. So again, very interesting stuff. The Gunas that are associated with this are on all three levels, primary, secondary, and tertiary levels. They're all tamasic energy. So what is tamasic energy? Again, we're talking about inertia. It doesn't mean these people are immobile or inactive. That's not what this means. It means that the focus is on the material primarily. So the focus is on those things that are dense. And these, again, another way to kind of look at this is look at the rulership. So the top two gunas, tamasic and tamasic, actually represent the rulership of this, which is Mars. So Mars is this sort of active masculine energy, but this is not self-aware energy. This is more impulsive in nature, more instinctual in nature, and it can be very sexual. Again, very active, very driven, very sexual. And again, these words like driven, for instance, that's going to come into my explanation as we move along here. So this idea of this pearl in the sky, this fixed star in the sky, this spica, means that these folks are imbued with beauty, brightness. And that is a lot of the things that get explored through this particular nakshatra are things that deal with kind of superficial stuff. But this is also one of the most mystical of nakshatras. In fact, every woman that I dated who had this nakshatra somewhere prominently in their chart, they all seem to have gone through this very massive wake-up call at some point in their life, whether it was accidents, mystical happenings, or something went goofy in their brain in terms of they got a little bit crazy. There was something that came along and woke them up. Again, because this is energy that can be very fixed. This is, again, tamasic on all levels. This is definitely material focused. Now, another way to kind of look at this is that if there's, again, this applies to all the nakshatras, which is this idea of whether somebody is moving towards spiritualization or not. And in this particular case, if these folks are not moving towards spiritualization, a lot of negative qualities do manifest, which is they can create a facade. They can be kind of full of shit. The one thing, and I don't mean that well, I do kind of mean that negatively, self-centeredness, self-absorption, again, vanity, things that are all about the beauty. But I've also found a lot of low self-esteem stuff sometimes gets connected with these folks as well. Again, when you're putting too much weight into something superficial, you realize there's no guts to it. There's no density, there's no depth. So these folks, again, I like to think of these people through the lens of a progression through life or a life path. So I would say early on in life, that Mars energy that rules this nakshatra is very prominent. And again, Mars is a bit like the impulsive teenager. It's not, the energy here is not self-aware, hardly at all. So these folks end up slamming into things and basically meeting a great deal of resistance. I'm going to go ahead and read a quote from one of my favorite books on the nakshatras, which is Myths and Symbols of Vedic Astrology by Bipin Bihari. So I'll read the quote, and I think this will give you a really good nutshell as to what this happens in this nakshatra. So it says, on this path, the individual's wings are clipped and his activities fettered. He feels tremendously frustrated. He must be completely broken before he can become free. His feet have to be washed in the blood of his heart before he can really move forward. So that is one of the quotes. Here's another quote. Chitra represents this realization of the true self through the ordeals of life and complete subjugation or destruction of one's material nature and self-centeredness. So I kind of look at this, when they're talking about this destruction and frustration and things like that, this is not necessarily the rags to riches story we're talking about here. What it's talking about is when one's mind, because again, the energies that are associated with this are Virgo into Libra. Mercury, which rules Virgo, we're talking about intellect. Libra is ruled by Venus, which is more like intuition, more feminine intuition. So how these folks end up moving into this spiritualization process, one, impetus happens, meaning something that generates a great deal of frustration, confusion, or desire, because this is a kama life path, meaning desire-based. Something creates this desire for spiritualization in their life, some circumstance, some happening, or some person. And then what ends up happening is they generally, instead of going out into the world and basically trying to figure out everything through the material plane, they end up doing is they intellectualize it, again, which is what we're talking about, that Virgo energy, and they intuitively and instinctually learn about it. So there's a lot of growth potential here once they reach that sort of moment in which they are basically, I guess, collide with their destiny. So what these folks end up creating is, well, so first off, this is a very creative nakshatra in general, whether they're being superficial or not. The idea here is that this happening that jars these people into the realization that there is indeed more, that there is indeed more depth in them as well as the world around them. Whatever the situation is, the energy that represents their process, and I'm going to mispronounce this for sure, it's Tvashtar, Tavashtar, could be. Either way, you're going to get the point. It is the celestial architect. So this is the god that rules this, is the celestial architect. Now, what does the celestial architect do? The celestial architect is in a lot of ways about efficiencies. So the celestial architect, when he was, when he, she, whatever was creating, they had to chip away what was unnecessary or no longer what not needed in order to create something polished. So basically the idea here is that everything in our creation is constantly undergoing this change. And every time there's change, there's something new created from something that which is destroyed. And again, Chitra represents this path very much so. there's that point when they're moving impulsively through life. They hit that happenstance, boom, everything blows up in their face, their intellect turns on, their intuition and instincts turn on, and they go, "Oh, why am I so frustrated by this particular path?" And what they're being forced to do is to harmonize with their heart, their greater, the greater divine guidance, that deeper self, through which presence in the intuition, which are kind of non-languages in some way, but they are signals which we feel. And the only way we can really feel and experience these signals is through presence. So these folks are forced into the spiritualization process so they can then start to basically take advantage of this God's energy to chip away what's unnecessary. And so eventually what they do is they discover what's authentic. And the authenticity for these folks can still be very material. And what I'm talking about here is these aren't necessarily folks who become monks and things like that. Not to say they wouldn't, but they often become like great artists and architects and creators and people who work with their hands and, et cetera, et cetera. So they can get a great deal done. And this is a very fortunate placement if these folks can harmonize with what's authentic. Other words, getting caught up in the realm of the superficial, and again, not to say that that's not part authentic for them, but it's about seeing the depth in the culture of glamour and beauty, about seeing what's below it, what's below that facade. And once they can see what's below that facade, they can bring a great deal of consciousness and awareness to beauty and to glamour and to things like interior design and architecture and those things. So in a lot of ways, I kind of think of these folks as their spiritualization process is this idea that we shine from the inside out. And again, these folks have a lot of shine. That singular star that represents them is a very bright star. So these folks, once they realize that all this externalized energy, which is the behavior of Mars, which is this total externalization. Another way to look at Mars here is think about the penis. So the penis is kind of the representation of the male. It hangs outside the body, and when a man is stimulated, it points to where it just points. So men's energy in general, are kind of directed by that arrow, which is the penis. So this Mars energy, which can be very impulsive and very directed, like I said, it also has the ability to learn and to grow and to be guided. And that's what these folks are learning to do, is to take advantage of that Venus energy, which is in Libra, learning about intuition and instincts and learning how that can guide them. So they can then find spirit in matter. They can find the deeper understanding in those things which are superficial. The projection that's associated with this is projection 1, and that is called the soldier. Projection 1, it's actually pretty interesting, and I'm reading like Yogi Bhajan's summation of this projection, and there's a lot of talk about, again, very driven energy again, and protective. So it's ruled by largely the negative mind, which is tamasic. It's manas, it's tamasic, again, negative mind. So negative mind is the fastest mind. It's basically, it rises up in order to defend your well-being and to keep you secure. So again, these folks can be a little bit defensive, but what it really is they're fearless. So these are very fearless people. And again, this resonates with everyone I know who've had this energy predominant in their chart. Incredibly fearless. But if it's unbalanced, it's actually rigidity. Again, we're talking about a lot of density with this tamasic energy. So I'm going to go ahead and show you in the next segment how I came to connect Chitra Nakshatra with projection 1 in Yogi Bhajan's book, The Mind. All right, here we are. So we're taking a look at Yogi Bhajan's book, The Mind. This is the flowchart that's in the back that I use to determine the connections between the nakshatras and the various yogic exercises or practices in this book. So what we have here is we have Chitta, which means the universal mind, and we're showing here is the precipitation of, I guess, from universal mind to all the various projections. And this is very much kind of like yogic psychology in some ways. So the projections are on the level of water. So what we actually have going on here is we have the precipitation down through the elements. Ether being all the elements in the most finite or subtle. We have air, fire, water, and eventually earth. So water, though, represents the projections or how we flow out into life. So Chitra is tamasic energy on its impersonal mind level, meaning kind of like its life path or its general path in life, I guess is really the best way I can think about it anyway. And then you follow this arrow down. You've got manas, again, negative mind. And see. And then also finally on the tertiary level, more negative mind, or how to deal with a threat. It's the soldier. And so what you do once you've found the nakshatras, well, first off, you needed to know what the gunas were associated with this nakshatra, which is in that Bepin Bahari book I mentioned earlier. But here we are, projection 1, the soldier, how to deal with the threat. Here's a little bit of explanation. The practice or the meditation, done for 31 minutes. I suggest doing 3 to 11 minutes to start. So next segment, I'll go ahead and show you how to do this exercise. All right, so we're going to go ahead and do projection 1 or soldier. Well, so first thing about this nakshatra is I have to, this meditation associated with Chitra Nakshatra. The one thing I have to say about it is that it's really interesting to me was I'm looking at what Yogi Bhajan has assigned to this particular nakshatra, and that is extended exhales or retaining the breath out. So a lot of yogic exercises are generally kind of the opposite way around. There's a lot of breath retention, but seldom do you see a lot of retaining out. Now, my assumption about why this might be is that the exhale or breath retaining out is associated with the rest and digest aspect of the autonomic nervous system, which is the parasympathetic branch. So this is a de-stress exercise, basically. So and I guess actually when you think about it, so all the tamasic energy associated with Chitra, I guess it kind of makes sense because it's fast energy. Nakshatra, it's fast energy in terms of its impulsiveness. So there's a great need to slow down. So I believe that's why Yogi Bhajan chose this particular exercise for this particular nakshatra. So the first thing is we'll go over the mudra. So the mudra is like so. It's called a closed lotus, meaning my thumb and all the fingertips are touching. And you hold this at the level of the ribs, quote unquote, 60 degrees out from the body's center line. And of course you want to maintain nice upright posture. The dristi, there's no assigned dristi or eye position here. There kind of is. So what they have you focusing on here is actually at the brow point. So your eyes can be closed on this with your awareness or your focus here at the brow point. So usually what I do here is I roll my eyes upward a little bit, and then I put my awareness right at the center of the brow. So don't think of this as being up here. This is not the bindu point. It's actually between the brows at the root of the nose. And I kind of like to think about it, I follow this path towards the center of the brain. And at the center of the brain is where I place my awareness. So it's the brow point, root of the nose, back towards the center of the brain. And that's where you want to lay your focus or your concentration. And the purpose of this is If you have your awareness, your concentration placed at one of the various bindu points on the head, so it could be brow point, it could be up at the crown, it could be at the back of the head. And there are various points. There's about, probably 3 to 5 different points that I've seen in terms of concentration points. But in this particular case, like I said, we're going to focus at the brow point. And the mantra is quite simple. It's just sa, ta, na, ma, repeated 4 times. So 16 beats. Sa, ta, na, ma, sa, ta, na, ma, sa, ta, na, ma, sa, ta, na, ma. Boom. Now, what's interesting about this is it's done mentally. This is not done out loud. And what we're doing here is we're doing this with the breath retained out. So what you're going to do, again, hands in mudra, you're going to inhale deeply, and then exhale completely. And when you're exhaling here, what you want to do is you want to be pulling root lock or mula bandha, and this will lock the air out. And so what mula bandha is, or root lock, is you want to contract your anus, the perineum, the genitals, and pulling in the belt line. So you're going to have this nice firmly pulled root lock. Thing to watch out for here is if you have a vague sense of the contractions along your pelvic floor, there may or may not be a tendency to overdo this one. So you want to make sure it's not like a death grip. You don't want to burst any blood vessels or anything ridiculous here. So again, a gentle but firm, is that possible? Contraction along your pelvic floor, and then pulling in the belt line, and that'll give you a nice mula bandha. So let's go ahead and repeat that. So it's inhaling, deep breath. Begin to apply root lock, exhaling. Awareness is at the brow point, eyes are closed. Mentally reciting in 16 beats, sa, ta, na, ma, sa, ta, na, ma, sa, ta, na, ma, sa, ta, na, ma. Again, mentally doing that. And then once you've recited that all 4 times, 4 satanamas, you inhale. Well, first off, you want to relax mula bandha, then inhale again, then exhale all the air out again, pulling root lock. 4 satanamas, relax root lock, inhale. And so that's the pattern with this particular nakshatra. Again, just to review real quickly, all the focal points, awareness at the brow point. On exhale, pulling root lock, retaining breath out for 4 satanamas or 16 beats. Relaxing root lock, inhaling once again, very, very, very deeply, and repeating. So with all that said, hopefully you enjoyed this video and you enjoy this particular exercise, this particular practice. Like I said, this is a great de-stress exercise. All the retaining out really activates that parasympathetic branch of the nervous system. So with all that, thank you much. I appreciate you watching the video.